The night was cold and merciless. Rain poured from the heavens, drumming against the treetops, drowning the hurried whispers of a desperate man. A carriage tore through the drenched forest path, wheels carving deep scars into the mud, horses kicking up sprays of water as the driver lashed the reins. His breath came in ragged gasps, his soaked cloak clinging to his frame. "Faster! Move it, damn you!" he bellowed over the howling winds. Inside the swaying carriage, Celine clutched a basket against her chest, her knuckles white. Across from her, Thomas reached forward, gripping her trembling hands. "It will be all right," he whispered, though the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Celine said nothing, only holding the basket closer. As the village emerged through the downpour, torches flickered against the storm. Waiting figures rushed forward as the carriage skidded to a halt. Soldiers, villagers, hands reached for the carriage door, raking it open. "Inside, quickly!" a man urged, ushering the couple from their seats. "We don't have much time!" The driver, still gripping the reins, turned toward the path they had come from. The rain blurred his vision, but his ears did not deceive him. A sound, distinct beneath the storm. Hoofbeats, slow, steady, inevitable. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain crept into his bones. "He's already here," he whispered, his face draining of color. Then, louder, "Run!" The archers at the village gate tensed, arrows knocked. Their commander stepped forward, eyes locked on the black abyss of the road beyond. "Loose!" he ordered. A volley of arrows vanished into the darkness. Silence. A heartbeat passed. Another. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the night. His armor was black as the void, rainwater running beads down his plated frame. In his gauntleted hands, he wielded a longsword, forged of a blue crystal blade. The commander raised a fist. "Hold!" The knight stepped forward, his pace unhurried. Another arrow streaked toward him. He moved, blade flashing, and the arrow split in two before hitting the ground. "Loose!" A second volley rained upon him. He weaved between them with unnatural grace, deflecting some, letting others glance harmlessly off his armor. Then he was among them. The screams of the men filled the air as the mysterious stranger cut through them like wheat before the scythe. Blood mingled with the rain. Bodies fell, and within moments, the village gate was nothing but a graveyard. At the cabin, Ariella stood frozen, staring at her father. Sword in hand, he turned to her. "Take them to the boat, now!" "But father, this is not debatable!" The finality in his voice sent shudders through her spine. She grabbed Celine's hand and pulled her away, Thomas close behind. They ran through the cabin, bursting out the back toward the docks. At the river's edge, a lone figure waited, a young man clad in the robes of the Order of Light. Parker. He turned to them as they approached. "You made it," he breathed, relief flashing across his face. "Sir Robert's not far. Get in the boat." The trees trembled behind them. The air thickened with malice. Ariella hesitated. Parker turned to her, gripping her shoulder firmly. "Get them out of here. I'll handle this." She shook her head. "I can't do this without you." "Yes, you can." His grip tightened. "If it comes to that, you leave without me." Her breath caught. The dark night's presence pressed against them like a physical force. Parker held her gaze. "The light will guide you, Ariella." He turned to face the enemy, drawing his long swords. The knight stepped forward through the clearing. Ariella clenched her jaw, then took hold of Celine's hand and climbed in the boat. Parker exhaled, steadying his stance. The knight lunged, but Parker met him steel for steel. The duel erupted in flashes of silver and blue, their swords clashing in a fury of strikes. Parker fought with purpose, his blade moving in precise arcs, forcing the knight to adjust. He was no ordinary warrior. He was trained by the Order, and more than that, he wielded the light. His blade ignited with a golden glow as he parried a crushing strike, countering with an offense that sent the Dark Knight staggering back a step. The air shimmered around Parker as the light coursed through him, strengthening his speed, his reflexes. He struck again, fast, relentless, pushing the Dark Warrior onto the defensive. For the first time, the stranger hesitated. Parker pressed forward, his blade humming with divine energy. His strikes were not just swift, but righteous, each one cutting through the veil of darkness that surrounded his opponent. A fierce diagonal slash forced the knight to retreat a step, then another. Ariella, still watching from the boat, dared to hope. Parker pivoted, feinting left before driving his sword toward the knight's exposed flank. The blade connected, slicing through armor. Blood oozed from the wound, but if the knight felt pain, he did not show it. For a moment, Parker thought he could win. Then he saw it. A subtle shift, a feigned stumble. Too late, Parker realized his mistake. He had overcommitted. The knight's blade flashed upward in an arc of unnatural speed. Parker's breath stalled as the blade bit into his side. The glow of the light flickered. His grip weakened. A second strike followed, then a third. A final blur of motion. His head struck the mud before his body fell. Ariella gasped, her heart hammering in her chest. Thomas roared, grabbing Celine's arm. "Into the boat!" He shoved her aboard, gripping the side, trying to climb it himself. But the knight was there. A gauntleted hand shot out, seizing Thomas's collar. Celine screamed as the knight drew him back. "Go!" Thomas shouted. With all his strength, he shoved the boat, the current dragging it away. She reached for him, but it was too late. The knight drove his blade through Thomas's back. Blood bloomed in the frigid water. Ariella clutched the oars, face pale. Celine's breath came in chokes, sobs as the fog thickened around them. We have to get to Lyndhurst, Celine said, eyes wide with horror. Sir Robert will... A shadow flickered on the water. The Dark Knight stood at the river's edge, hand raised. The mist swirled around his fingers. Then, darkness coiled from his palm, slithering across the surface of the water. A tendril of black magic lashed out, wrapping around Celine's throat. She gasped, her hands clawing at the unseen force. Ariella lunged forward, gripping her wrist. "Hold on!" she cried desperately. The fog parted for an instant. The knight stood motionless, his spell unyielding. Celine's gaze met Ariella's. Her fingers dug into the boat's edge, nails scraping the wood. "You must not fail," she choked out. Then the darkness took her under. Ariella screamed as the water stilled. She turned back to the boat and began to row with all her might until she could not row any longer. The basket that so many had sacrificed their lives for lay at her feet. Rain pounded against it. Her breath hitched, trembling. She reached out, hesitating before placing a hand on the lid. No sound, no crying, only the rhythm of the river and the whisper of the winds. For a fleeting moment, she feared the worst. But as her fingers brushed the woven surface, a warmth pulsed beneath her touch. Gentle, faint, yet unmistakable. A soft glow shimmered from the tiny gaps in the wicker, like a candle struggling against the night. "It's just you and me now, Amador." Ariella exhaled. Her hands trembled as she gripped the oars. The shore vanished in the mist. The knight's silhouette faded into obscurity. She was alone now, drifting into the unknown. No guide, no path, only darkness. She tilted her head back, eyes searching the storm-ridden sky. The thick, swirling clouds seemed endless, an abyss stretching over her, suffocating and vast. But then, just for a moment, a break. A sliver of silver light slipped through the storm, the faint glow of the moon barely piercing the veil of black. A flicker of hope, small, distant, but real. She swallowed, her voice barely rising above a whisper. "The light will guide me," she repeated, and she prayed that it was true.